Well, good morning, all. We're just going to wait a minute or so as people join um, the TechCast. Ervin, nice to see you this morning. Great hairstyle.
Thanks, Roger.
Great hairstyle. And now that I'm in Texas, I've decided I've finally got to pick a team. Unfortunately, not doing so well at the moment, I believe. So,
Yeah.
yeah, not that I know any of the details. I'm still learning the game.
Well, they're not a bad team, but I'm from Philadelphia, so I'm not a big fan of the Cowboys. Sorely, I'm a Eagles fan this week, and I'm not feeling so great. But I'm joining the wagon on the Chiefs, so I'm going to be a Chiefs fan for the rest of the year, for next couple weeks anyway.
Okay, good. We've got a good number of people coming in still, so I'm just going to leave it a minute if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So, so yeah, I've even got the sweatshirt and all today.
I see. Yeah.
Dressed up for the occasion. All right, so let's go ahead and make a start. I think there's still a few people coming in, but just in case there are folk who don't know, I'm Roger Cressy, one of the founders of the Cubics Group. We're an Oracle Platinum Partner company, and we operate around the world, and we implement ERP, EPM, and analytics solutions for our customers. Really, today, this is part of my volunteer role with the Analytics and Data Oracle user community. I work with a whole gang of wonderful people, including Irv, actually, Uncle Irv. So I'll introduce him properly a little bit later. But it's a real honor to be involved with this bunch of people. And not only am I learning lots, I've made some good friends. So we'll give you some ways that you can actually get involved with us as well in the future. Irv is actually going to be presenting, really demonstrating OAC and OAS, but he's using some interesting data. He's using the fantasy football data to actually do it. So he's got a fantasy football decision support tool. So we're going to do that presentation, and then we'll have Q&A. While I'm talking about Q&A, please note there is a specific Q&A area for you to enter questions. Don't put them in the general chat. If you put them in the Q&A, I'll be looking out for those, and I'll either be rude and interrupt if it makes sense to, or I'll hold it to the end. Just to talk a little bit about our TechCast. So we've got an upcoming TechCast. The next one is on February the 4th. And John Mead will be talking to us about metadata, the key to user engagement. Again, John, I've known for many years. That's likely to be a very interesting presentation. The other thing is we've got our amended date for TechCast days. Please note, it is now from February the 16th to February the 18th. So coming up next month. And again, it'll be broken up into machine learning, spatial and graph, and analytics plus. So on each day, there'll be those focuses. Go and have a look at the website and see our previous TechCasts as well. We've got, in fact, Opal, I had the honor of hosting for You Complete Me, the long-awaited union of Oracle EPM and Analytics Cloud. That was actually really well attended and was a really good presentation. Opal has a very good way of describing things. Another one of my favorites, Patrick Wheeler, easy load transform model, auto data insights and more. He's giving updates in that. It's an interesting one because it gives an update on OAC. So that's the TechCast. Some ways to connect with us, and you'll be able to see what Irv is showing on the presentation at the moment. We've got a Slack channel, and in fact, there'll be a Slack invite posted into the chat for you. Carrie, who's behind the scenes today, is helping us out with that. We have a newsletter that gets published. If you go to these will all be archived, by the way, so you'll be able to go and get these. But some of them also that will be popped into the chat for you to just be able to grab straight away. We've got a LinkedIn area, and we've got a Twitter account. So please do find ways of interacting with us. So, and then really to just say that we're interested in hearing from you as well. If you've got something that you're interested in presenting, we're always interested in someone showing us new ways of using Oracle and their particular bent on doing it. If you go to the TechCasts area of the ANDOUC website, you'll find a place where you can actually submit abstracts. So really, I think all that remains for now is to introduce Uncle Erv. I'll give you the formal stuff first. He's an independent consultant with over 15 years of experience using Oracle BI products. He's worked on BI projects throughout the country in industries such as healthcare, manufacturing and distribution, financial services, utilities, hospitality, and entertainment. He has a certificate in business intelligence from Villanova and is an Oracle ACE associate. Really, just to add to that, his right arm is perfectly fashioned for imbibing a beer while we put the world to rights. If I had to describe him, I'd say master beer drinker, team owner in the NFL Fantasy League, and all-round good fellow. I'm privileged to call you a friend. Thank you for joining us today. Look forward to hearing what you've got to say. So with that, I'm going to hand over to you, sir.
Thank you, Roger. I appreciate that. And it's an honor to work with you as well. This presentation is, I want to demonstrate some of the aspects of OAC and OAS and how we can use that with using fantasy football league data as the backdrop of it. So we want to blend aspects of classical and modern analytics. We want to generate and import data sets. We'll then explore some of the hidden components of the data, hidden insights of the data using right-click stats, getting reference lines, trend lines, clusters, and outliers. And then finally, we'll come to the use case for fantasy football decisions and support. So that's what we want to walk through today. So as I said, fantasy football, I'm actually working for my 24-year-old who is the owner. I'm a data analyst for him. He's come to me and asked me to make some recommendations for him, database recommendations. And so that's where we are. I'm a longtime football fan. I played in youth and I played in college, but I love to watch more than I like to play, for sure. But just let me spend about 5 minutes on fantasy football itself, just introduce it to everyone. Fantasy football is a game that allows the participants to be the owner, the general manager, and the coach of your own football league. So your team, your league that you would be in typically composes about 20 to 20 teams, and you would put together a schedule and play against these teams within your league. At the beginning of the season, all the owners, all the participants get together and you have a draft, and you draft players that are on real football teams so for that season. And so you have an opportunity to draft those players that you want to be on your team, and so forth. And then a schedule is put together where you play against the owners of the players, the other owners in your team. So your team plays against another team within your fantasy football each week. And so each week, based on the performance of the players on your team versus the performance of the players on the other team, then the scores are tabulated and there's a winner each week. And then you pass on to the next week. This game has actually grown tremendously in popularity and has actually changed the way we watch football in general. We now look at football and it's not so much what team is going to win or lose, but how well your players are doing on any given team that week. And you may even compare that to your opponent, which is how well their players are doing. But as an owner, you have the ability to release players. You can trade players to other teams. And if there's a player who's not on a team in your league, you can pick that player off the wire and add that player to your team. as you make up your team. There are actually several types of leagues within the fantasy football world, and the rules vary from who's hosting the league, and so there are different organizations that host football leagues, fantasy football leagues. But on any given team, you can have 20 to 15 to 20 players across several positions. That would be quarterback, running back, tight end, kicker, and a wide receiver. And you can have multiple number of those players on your team, but then there are rules about how many of these players within these positions can actually be assigned to play during a given week. And then you only get the points for those teams, those players that you're actually playing that week. In our case, we have 4 teams that are participating across 4 different leagues. What I want to do is create an opportunity or display an opportunity where we're going to use the features that are within Oracle Analytics Server and Oracle Analytics Cloud that enable us to put together a classic and modern analytics. We can use the benefits of the classic side and the benefits of the modern side to put together a decision that use these features to allow us to meet our mission as decision support team. So in our case here, our current situation, we are at week 12, and we are at the end of week 11, and we've been asked to make a recommendation of 3 wide receivers who are going to play for week 12 out of 6. So in each team, we have 6 wide receivers available to us. Our task is to identify which 3 of the 6 wide receivers are going to play in week 12. And we have about 2 days to make this decision and give this recommendation. That's the mission that is before us. What we have at our disposal, we have a classical data model where we've put together a data model, and I'm just going to switch over here to the demo side. So we've had this classical data model that most of our users have available to them who are using OBIEE even, that allow us to create fact tables, have dimensional tables, and this is enterprise-wide data that is scrubbed and cleaned. It goes through an ETL process, and if we ever make any changes, we have a development process, a testing process, a migration process. So this is a very classical data model and metadata that's used and developed with the admin tool. With this, then we can use the classic analytics and create dashboards. So given that data model, we can create dashboards. And we've already created a classic data dashboard that allows us to analyze the quarterbacks that are on our team compared to the quarterbacks throughout the league, and identify what are the attributes that make a good quarterback, and what are the impacts of the quarterback amongst the rest of the team. So we've done that within our classic data model. Let me go back here to presentation. What the benefit of upgrading to OAC, when we move away from off of OBIEE, is that we have the benefits of DV. So we've all very familiar with the /analytics URL. We also have the DV URL that allows us to create projects and gives us the modern side of the analytics. And when I say classic analytics, I am talking about the analytics that we've done with the dashboards and analysis. And then when I say modern analytics, it's the components that it brings to us won't have the ability to look at our data model within projects and have the dynamic ability to dynamically explore that data and look at the hidden insights that might be hidden within that data. So what I'm going to do, what I've been asked to do is to look at our receivers and figure out which of these receivers we should play in the next week coming up on our fantasy football team. Let's see if I can go back into the presentation or to the live demo. So as I said, I have available to me the same one instance, 2 URLs that allows me to toggle between the classic dashboards and then looking at being able to use projects. And what I want to do is start out by creating a very simple project that allows me to look at my teams, and I can use my metadata, the metadata that is within my organization. So I can use my enterprise organization, subject areas and folder sets. And I'm going to use this fantasy football subject area, add that to the project. Just getting started, trying to understand how am I going to recommend these players. So first off, I know I only want to look at position. I want to drag position up to the filter and choose wide receivers. I really am interested in just the wide receivers. And I'm going to focus on a 17. So I'm going to go ahead and take the team code and focus on team 1 for now. And I want to look at the players, the NFL week, holding down the control key as I select these, and open up the facts here and pick up fantasy points. And then I'm going to right click and pick my visual, and I'm going to pick a line. And so here is a simple graph that I've chosen. And certainly I could have created this graph on the analytics side pretty easily, pretty straightforward. If I go to a catalog here and look at a quick graph. So I could have very easily created that graph on the analytics side. But what the project side gives to me that the analytics doesn't necessarily provide is the right-click functionality that I could right-click and add stats. So I'm going to go ahead and add a reference line right now. And by default, this reference line is an average. I have the options of changing it to different types of reference lines. But right now, I do want to look at an average line. I have the ability to change it from being either a line or a band. I want to keep it a band. And so what I'm looking at here is my players, the 6 players that are on this first team with 6 wide receivers. They're listed here in the different colors. And this line here represents the average per week. And then I'm looking at how these players have performed each week above and below the average. And I can see they're pretty much all over the place. So I want to go ahead further, and I don't have enough information to make a recommendation at this time, but I'm going to see if I can add trend. And if I were to add a trend line here, I can right click again and add a trend line. And I can see that it gets pretty busy when I'm looking at all the players at the same time and a trend line. Just going to add that palette back. If I took the player and added to the filter and then said I just filtered it down to just looking at Juju, I can see where Juju performed across the average and what Juju's trend line is. But I still can only look at this in a reasonable way at one player at a time. So I can understand that if you have only one object that you're looking at or one subject that you're looking at, and you're looking at that subject across time, a trend line can be a graph is very useful, and a trend line can be very helpful to understanding what's happening within that data. I want to go ahead and add additional stats to this. I'm going to right click here and add a forecast. So having the ability to right click and add these types of analysis, these types of stats to my my view very quickly. It allows me to analyze the data without getting caught into the formulas that it takes to make this happen, but I still then have some options. So here I have, in my forecast, I have the options of how many periods I'm going to forecast outward, what type of forecast I want to use, what's the interval I want to use within my forecast. At the end of the presentation, I'll give you some links you can go and get a lot of detailed information about how to pick these options and which one's appropriate for the type of data that we're using here. So from my perspective, I still don't want to make a recommendation off of this. And if I want to go ahead and get back to the rest of the players, I'm going to go ahead and remove this filter. And so here I'm looking at all the players and their forecasts and their trends and how they compare to the average line. But I still don't have enough information here that allows me to make a recommendation. And so what I probably want to do is go with clusters. And I'm just going to go back to the presentation side here. So I want to go ahead and look at clusters and outliers, but looking at them in a graph is probably not the way that my management is going to want to make decisions about what players are going to play. Having some additional conversations on what we know, we want to look at our wide receivers and have some concepts of how to predict how well wide receiver is going to do in the upcoming week. And so we looked at three aspects, and one was how the wide receiver has performed in the past. And then the second one was, how's the wide receiver's quarterback has been performing? How has the quarterback performed in the past? And then the third one was, how good is the opposing defense that wide receiver is going to play, and in terms of giving up yards allowed against a given defense. So these are three aspects we wanted to compare and analyze for our within using the cluster capabilities. So going back to the presentation. So looking at our first group was how well are our players doing? And we thought, well, let's go ahead and remove the reference line, and I'm going to remove the trend and keep it wrong button there. And remove the forecast. And I want to change the display type to a table and place the player along with the rows, and go ahead and remove the weeks. So we want to see how do these players fit, or how well they performed in comparison to the other players, but not just the players in their team. We wanted to see how they perform with players throughout the league. So we wanted to go ahead and remove the team constraint. And now I wanted to go ahead and right click on the visual and add cluster. And so now I'm going against my enterprise data and within my enterprise model, and I've added this cluster to see who are the better players and who are the least performing players. Cluster 1 would be the lower player, and cluster 5 would be a higher ranked player. But this didn't really give me the benefit of who's players. I really needed to add a calculation because some players have played more games than others, and so they would naturally have more points than others. So I needed to create a calculation here that allowed me to analyze the points per game that a player has played. And you'll notice that there's a calculation wizard within the projects module within DV that is very similar to what we had in the analytics side, and it's even more robust here. And I really want points per game. And I can go out here to my facts and get the fantasy points. And I just want to very simply divide that by the number of games and validate that and save. Now, this is what I really want my clusters to be based on. And I'm going to take that and replace points per game. And so now this tells me a better view of who are the better performing players per game versus those who are not as well performing. Again, the higher the cluster number, the better the player. And if I can look at that and see, does that make sense to me? And then here, these are the players who have not performed as well. And so I want to use this as part of a larger analysis, but this is a fact that I want to use that I don't have in my in my classical data model. So right now I'm going to take that and save it off. One of the things I can do is save this as, when I could use the share and file, and I can actually save this as a CSV for data and save that piece of data as a data file, as a data set. I'm going to cancel that for now because I did skip over a piece that I wanted to talk about, is to right click and add stats and outliers. You would notice that when I first did this, when I had the line chart, because I had a time series metric involved, or a time series there, then I was able to use forecasting and trend and those types. So without the time dimension involved, I'm limited to just my clusters and outliers, which is where we think that where we want to focus. And looking at the outliers, again, I was just able to do a right click and show outliers. We didn't think it didn't matter to us if you were an outlier in cluster 5 or not. If you were an outlier in cluster 4, it was related to how far you were away from the center of that cluster. Were you in the outskirts on the top or on the bottom of that cluster? And again, I'll give you some information and some links to give you more information as to the details of the data. So we decided that we didn't necessarily need to use outliers in our data set, but I wanted to show that to you just because it was an option to be used in the future. So we actually just went ahead and exported this. And as you probably would imagine, I've already done this. I want to switch over to data. I'm not going to save that. And here are the data sets that I've created. So when I set that off as exported that as a CSV file, then I was able to import that as a data set. And here you see me bring it in as a project, and that's not necessarily what I wanted to do. So if I go back to data, I just want to right click and inspect. And I can look at the data elements. So now that data set that I saved on my local PC has been imported to the server now, and it's available for me to use it in my analysis going forward because I've imported that as a data set within the force. So I exported it as a CSV file, all my receivers across the entire league and what their points per game were as of week 11 And now I've imported that as a data set that I can use as a new dimension going forward that's not in my classical model. Let's see if I missed anything here. Okay, so I'm going to go back to here. So now I'm ready to really tie that cluster concept into how we built the fantasy football decision tool. And we wanted to look at three aspects of the players. We wanted to look at the points per week for each player, the player clusters for their quarterback. So whatever quarterback is playing as of week 11 and going into week 12, how good is the quarterback for that wide receiver? And then how bad is the defense that wide receiver is going to be playing? So these are the things we wanted to try to put together and understand for our decision tool. So we've already built the framework for the players themselves, and we understand how to put the players themselves into clusters as their performance is, and it is pretty much compared to other receivers within the league. Let's take a look at how we built the clusters for the quarterbacks. And let's go back to real time. Close that. So for the quarterbacks, we did an analysis of the quarterbacks previously, and we added the quarterback cluster to the classical model. So within our classical model, within our data model, within RPD and ETLs processes, each week we have the quarterbacks put into clusters each week, and the players on that team are identified to what is the cluster of your quarterback for any given week. So I'm able to then use that to build my cluster for my player. So I can use the player. Again, I'm using the wide receiver for week 11 for here. And I'm adding then the cluster for those players that are coming from my model, because I've calculated that within the model itself. So I have those players, and so here is the quarterback cluster for each wide receiver, and I can look down that and say, does it make sense? When I look at these teams, does it make sense that these quarterbacks are within that particular cluster, the quarterbacks of those teams? And it's reasonable and it makes sense to me. So again, that is saved off as a data set and imported back in. That I can use later in my analysis. The last piece is the look at the opponents that a wide receiver is going to play against. And I absolutely did do that. So here I'm looking at the player, the game that's coming up for week 11. It's filtered for week 11. The opponent team, the player's team, the opponent's team, and then the opponent passing yards that they allow. So in this game, I'm looking at New England, Houston. The wide receiver plays for Houston. They're playing against New England. New England has given up some 344 yards of passing per game, and they're in cluster 5. So in this case, the more yards the defense gives up, the worse the team is, obviously, and the higher the cluster number. And that works for me in our model going forward, that the worst teams have a higher cluster count, and the better teams that give up the least amount of yards, they have a lower cluster count. And that works for me. You could reverse that, but that's what we wanted in our data model. And so we're able to export that off and using that same process. So then the culmination of this then is to put those data sets together, those new facts that we've developed, into a single analysis, a single project, so that we can analyze that and come up with the recommendations that we have for our upcoming week for our teams. So what I've been able to do now is let's go to the prepare tab and the data diagram. What I've been able to do at this point is to put together 3 new facts. Actually, 2 of these are new facts. One is a fact off my data model. So 2 brand new facts that were derived from the enterprise data, but does not exist there at the moment. Create these facts and put these together and tie them together with another dimension. And this is the fantasy team. So it allows me to say which players are on which team, and a fantasy team, and a data model within my project. Didn't have to do any ETL. Most of my calculations were right-click and select a calculation. So it's just a really straightforward way for a decision support tool. So in my visual then, I'm able to look at each team individually in a table here, in a table that I can look at the, let's go to this tab first. So I can look at the cluster of the player, and higher the cluster for the player, the better the player has been performing in the past. So these players are pretty good except for one. Then I can look at the cluster of the player's quarterback and see, and it goes to reason that the better players have better quarterbacks as well. And then I can look at the cluster of the player's team that they're going to play against. Again, the higher the cluster here, the worse the team is, or the more yards that team gives away. So I can see that for Juju, he's been performing well. He has a really good quarterback on Pittsburgh, and the opponent that he's playing, Jacksonville, they're not very good. So it's likely that he's going to give me a good set of points as compared to the other players on the team. And again, here, Nelson from Las Vegas, he's playing against KC. KC is really not a good defensive team and giving up yards. They give up a lot of yards, and he's fairly well, and he has a good quarterback, and he comes out with a 12 as well. Antonio Brown with Tampa Bay, he hasn't performed very well as the other players, but he has a very good quarterback, and the quarterback that plays for Tampa Bay. But the opponent that they're playing in Los Angeles, they are very good. So they don't give up many passing points. So he only comes up with a 10. And I can see there's a dilemma there on that team, that there's 3 players that are coming up with 10s for slightly different reasons. But I can certainly recommend the top 2 players here. If I were to look at team 2, here I can see that we have AJ Brown, Calvin, Emmaus, Equinus, T.Y. Hilton. These players, I can look at the top 3 here and see that AJ Brown and Calvin are the top performing receivers. They have very good quarterbacks, and they're playing against mediocre teams, somewhere in the middle teams. Whereas Brown here and T.Y. Hilton are not very well, do not have, are not performing well, but Brown has a very good quarterback from Green Bay, but he's playing against a very good team in Indiana, so that the team doesn't give up a lot of points. And I can look at the reasons why the other players aren't necessarily good picks over the top 3 that are here. And I can make that same analysis as I go through and for our recommendations for the other teams. But talking this over with my management, it was decided that we would actually like to value the player's performance over the opponent's uh, performance, or the opponent's how good the opponent is. In order to do that, we thought it would be a good idea to have weighted clusters. And so it was very easy then to adopt this calculation and create calculations here where I could have weighted clusters that allowed us to say that how good a player is performing is 1.5 multiplied by 1.5, but how well a team that you're playing against, how bad that team is multiplied by 0.5, and still give us the numbers. And we found that actually the ratings didn't matter much, but this was the model my management team decided they wanted to go with, and so that's where we ended up with. But so then this project tool then has the ability for us to narrate, and within the narration, then I'm able to actually add comments. And this is something we've always wanted to do on the analytics side. We wanted to add comments and allow other users to see the comments that we've added. So projects allows us to do that, where I can build a project, put together some analysis, and then add comments to it. As to here, I'm saying, hey, I'm choosing Brown over Higgins and Ferguson because of the quarterback play. And maybe that my management agrees with that, maybe they don't, but I have an opportunity to give inputs, and I can pass this on to them. And there's several ways. This actually goes into a presentation mode where I can present this to the management team within the project in presentation mode. I still have the ability to focus in on a particular visual within the presentation, and allow the management team even to add comments as we pass this amongst each other, and this analytics, this project amongst each other. We have the ability to export this. Okay. We have the ability to export this either as a PowerPoint or as a Adobe or as a image. And then the package allows us to export the entire project and send it to another, import it to another environment. But so this type of integration with allows us to be very reactive to our management and decisions that we're making, help our management make decisions, data-driven decisions, and not have to go through the ETL process to create new data constructs. I can create those on the fly and make these recommendations to the management team. See if there's anything I'm forgetting here.
Just about at time, sir.
Okay, I'm going to wrap this up here. So then the other final piece is, how do we do? It's let me just see if I can get out of this. And so I had the opportunity to go ahead and import the actuals and compare that then to, see if I can.
Love the comments it gives you. Spinning with you makes mind.
So how we do, here's the actuals. Our top picks, the two here, they were definitely good picks, as these are the actual points. What we missed is T had a very good game. We didn't necessarily anticipate that. And Antonio Brown had a very bad game. So he didn't come up with points that I had picked for that. And then on the other side, I'm trying to speed up here a little bit. The top picks, again, we expected AJ Brown and Calvin to do well. We expected I would have picked Brown over T.Y. Hilton. That would have been a mistake. What was interesting is that Brown and T.Y. Hilton were playing head to head watching that game. We didn't care who won, but we wanted Brown to do very well because we had him at our picks. But Green Bay did win, but T.Y. had a much better game. Down here, it pretty much one of the surprises were that Denzel did well. We didn't anticipate that. And Tyler Lockett did not do well. We anticipated Tyler Lockett doing much better than he did against in that game. And then down here. So one of the things we looked at, we learned from this exercise is that it doesn't really, it is important that your quarterback and your receiver is very good, but also that receiver has to be one of the top receivers on the team. And so we like to tie in that, say, well, yeah, what cluster are you in within the receivers on your team? And give that some credence to, you may be on a team, a receiver on a team with a very good quarterback, but are you the number one receiver? Or are you number 4 receiver? And that seems to have an impact on what we're seeing in our outcomes. Okay, so let me go back to here. And I just want to talk. So we talked about blending aspects of classical analytics, data models, or ETLs, with modern analytics, being able to import data from other sources and tie that data together and build constructs on a fly, generate import data and import data sets and use reference lines and trends. And then we showed the case study for how we used it within the fantasy football league that we were involved in. What does this all mean, the classical and the modern? I think it means that our organizations are going to change their processes, and maybe these constructs like this may become the prototype for what's going to be a new data constructs, new facts within our data model, so that we can build these facts in a project, build these constructs in a project, and then have them put back into the data model and involved in the data model and become available for the entire enterprise. So I certainly do recognize these are baby steps, but it's moving forward. It's actually allowing us to take the technology, how the technology is advancing as we move from OBIEE to OAC, as I talk to the user groups and say, hey, these are some of the things that are available to you now that used to be available only if you did some additional desktop tool that you would download and have to configure. And now these are available to our users as part of the normal URLs that they may receive to get access to it. And so our knowledge users, our expert users can start to utilize these tools to further advance the use of our data within the organizations. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and take in some questions.
Yeah.
Or comments.
Amazing, Ervin. So yeah, we are a little bit over time, but we've got well, Glenn Murray was saying no defensive players ? But I think you answered that because you then went and focused. You told about your focus, so I think that's been answered. Then Charlie wants to know. He said, is your fantasy league doing well using this analysis?
And well, my recommendations would have been okay, but my team did not win the championship. So my owner's team, I'm working for my 27-year-old, and we didn't win the championship this year. We won it last year, but we didn't win it this year.
Wow. And so with that, it really excellent presentation. I'm being schooled on football. See, I didn't even say American football. I'm learning. and also OAC. So with that, it just remains to say thank you very much, sir. It was really good. Oh, there's one more just popped up. Can you quickly show the mobile capabilities? I know we're well over time, so folks, this has been recorded and it will be posted in our TechCast archives online. But I'm happy to let this run a few minutes if there's still a number of people on. Are you able to do that?
No, we won't be able to do that. I think that's a much wider conversation that we'd have to have in another presentation. I wouldn't give it any justice to try to do it in about 5 minutes. It wouldn't make a
So
matter.
that's your next TechCast submission, Uncle Irv.
That sounds great. That sounds great. Thanks for that idea.
Yeah. All right. So with that, it just remains to say thank you, everybody, for attending. Appreciate you coming along, and we look forward to seeing your own submissions for us to evaluate, and to say thank you to you, Uncle Irv, once more. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.